Hey everyone, what's going on? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Mem, Daf 40 of Masechta Pesachim. Yeah, today we're just talking about like chametz a bit, and chametz coming in contact with water. At what point do you have to guard the wheat and the flour to make sure it doesn't become chametz? In Yanim like that. So we're all the way at the bottom of Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis. Amar of Yosef. Says of Yosef, a person shouldn't pour boiling water over two like wheat berries. Okay, because we're concerned that if you have two wheat berries, well then there might be like a split in one of them, and one of them will kind of rest in the split of the other, because we're concerned that if there's a split in one of the wheat berries, then the other wheat berry might rest in that split, which would mean that the hot water wouldn't very well get into that split, and then in the split it might become chametz. Got it? Good. Omer Abaye says, Abaye lichrich inish treshiboli bahadeyadode. Person shouldn't singe two was it stalks? I think this was barley, no? What does Rashi say? I don't know. Oh, no, wheat. Oh yeah, it's wheat, I think. So a person shouldn't take two stalks of wheat and then like singe one of them, because we're concerned that maybe some like wheat juice will come out of like one of them and go into the other one, and then the recipient of the wheat juice can become chametz. Amalei Rave. So Rave says to Abaye, if that's the case, afilu chadanami, tumunafik mihai reisha vala iduch reisha. Rave says, hey Abaye, if you're concerned about some wheat juice coming from one stalk and going into the other, why don't you even be concerned just about one stalk of wheat, that maybe some wheat juice will come out from the top of the stalk and get into some of the wheat at the bottom of the stalk. Se'elo Amar Rava, rather says Rava, meiperis ninu. Wheat juice is just fruit juice. Meiperis einan machmitzin, and fruit juice doesn't make things leaven. V'hadar be'Abaye me'ahi, and Abaye actually retracted what he had said about wheat juice getting from one stalk onto the other stalk. D'chol agav madlayu lo mechamtze, because anything that's flowing doesn't cause things to leaven, and I guess this wheat juice is flowing from one stalk to the other, so it won't cause any fermentation. If you have some kind of jug that you're like, I don't know, heating up wheat in this jug, so if it is schifa, if it is like overturned, then it will be permitted, because if it's overturned, then I guess any of the wheat juice that is coming out of it will like flow downward. But is zakifa, if it's like upwards, that all of the wheat juice will just kind of like stick to the bottom, I guess. Aser. Alright. Okay. Rava Amar says, Rava afilu zakifa nami shari, meiperis ninu meiperis einan machmitzin. Says Rava, even the upright one is aser, because even if all the wheat juice is just kind of like chilling there at the bottom, it won't make it chametz, since we're talking about fruit juice, and fruit juice doesn't make things chametz. So I guess if you have like this thing that you're heating up these wheats in them, so I guess if you flip it over, then anything coming out of it will be downwards, and I guess on the move because of like gravity, I guess. But if it's like just right side, in its proper way, all the juice, I guess, will just kind of hang out and pool by the rest of the wheat and cause chametz. In losasin seorin bepesach v'im losas nisbaku asuros or nisbaku mutaris. So again, Rabbi said in losasin sorin b'Pesach. So specifically barley, you may not soak on Pesach. Okay, v'im losas, and if you did soak barley on Pesach, nisbaku asuros, if they split, so then they would be an issue of chametz. Lo nisbaku mutaris, but if they didn't split, well then they're okay. Rabbi Yossi Omer shorin b'chometz v'chometz tzomson. So Rabbi Yossi says, well, if you soaked barley on Pesach, then just put them in vinegar, and the vinegar will stop the leavening. Omer Shmuel, ein halacha k'Rabbi Yossi. Shmuel says that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Omer Rav Chizda, Omer Mar Ukva, lo nisbaku mamish. So says Rav Chizda, the name of my ukva, that when we're talking about this barley, if it's split, it's chametz, it doesn't literally mean that it has to split. Even if this barley gets to the point where if you would put it on top of a barrel of wine, and then they would split on their own from the fumes of the wine, that would be considered split enough to be considered chametz. Whereas Shmuel disagrees, and he says, no, it literally needs to split. And one time, Shmuel was in a place of a guy named Bar Chashu, and he ruled over there that, like his reasoning, like his opinion, which is that the barley would have to split mamish. Omer Rabba, bal nefesh lo yilsos. So, Rabbah says that somebody who's a Yarei Shamayim, a God-fearing Yid, so lo yilsos, he won't soak. Now, he's not specific about what exactly he's not going to soak, but says Rabbah, somebody who's a Yarei Shamayim will not soak on Pesach. My iriya bal nefesh afilu kule al manami. To which the Gemara says, Rabbah, what do you mean somebody who's a Yarei Shamayim will not soak on Pesach? Anybody shouldn't be soaking on Pesach. Tanya, because we learned in a brayse in Los Sinsorin b'Pesach that we don't soak barley on Pesach. So hachi kamer. This is what Rabbah is saying. Bal nefesh afilu chitin tishrire lo yilsos. Aha. So this is what Rabbah is saying. Rabbah is saying that a Yarei Shamayim, even wheat, he will not soak on Pesach, even though wheat are hard and less of an issue of becoming chametz. Nonetheless, if you're a Yarei Shamayim, you won't even soak wheat on Pesach. What's this? Omar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, this is very interesting, Lamaisa. Man detzayis leila abba achol naima de ipusha. Somebody who listens to Abba, Abba, and he's referring to Rabbah as Abba. Now, why is that interesting? So Abba basically is just a lashon of kavod. Also, we've seen Shmuel sometimes refer to Rav as Abba. But what's interesting about this is that, I don't know, my understanding is that Rav Nachman was older than Rabbah. Rav Nachman was a student of Rav and Shmuel. And Rabbah was a student of Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna, I think, who were students of Rav and Shmuel. So he was kind of like the next generation. So it's interesting that Rav Nachman was referring to Rabbah as Abba, but okay. But also he says, so anybody who listens to Rabbah is going to be eating basically unclean bread, because if you're not soaking your wheat, so then you're not going to have very fine bread because it will be dirty. By the house of Rav Huna, they would soak the wheat. Rava bar oven, they would also soak the wheat by Rava bar oven. So Rav Nachman says, if you do like Rabbah, that you don't soak wheat on Pesach, well, then you're going to have dirty matzah. Interesting. What's also interesting is that Rabbah was poor. Rabbah was very poor. Rav Nachman, I believe, was very wealthy. He was the son-in-law of the Reish Galusa. So it's also interesting that, could be that Rav Nachman was more familiar with the more pleasurable things in life, perhaps. And for him, like the concept of eating anything other than fine flour, maybe it was like, why the heck would anybody want to do that? Where maybe Rabbah wasn't as accustomed to those types of things, and maybe it was less of a big deal for him. Interesting. Rava said, also lilsos, you're not allowed to soak any kinds of grains on Pesach. But what about the Brisa that says that we don't soak barley on Pesach? But doesn't that mean that we don't soak barley, but we're allowed to soak wheat? So the Gemara answers, no, it doesn't mean that. Lo mibaya ka'amar. It's saying not only this, but even that. Lo mibaya chitin came the isbeit Syria aylibu maya. Certainly wheat which has splits in it, so water will get in, and certainly you cannot soak wheat. Avosare the shi'e emashapridami kamash malon. But I may have thought that barley, since it is smooth, so maybe then the water won't get in, and maybe that would be okay. Kamash malon, that is what the Brisa is teaching us, that even barley you don't soak, but certainly not wheat. Hadar Rava, but then Rava retracted and he says mutter lilsos, that you're allowed to soak wheat and barley on. Well, I guess barley would probably be a problem because we have a Brisa that says not to, but Rava says you'd be allowed to soak wheat on Pesach. The Tanya, as we learn in a Brisa, Yosin bepas nakiya v'adra. Because Rava says, after all, we have a Brisa that says that you're allowed to use matzahs that are nikiya, that are made from like clean, white, fine flour, as well as coarse flour. But v'yefshar nikiya below the sisa. Now, if the Brisa says that you're allowed to use, very clean white flour, well, how do you get clean white flour? The way you get it is by first soaking it. You soak the wheat, and then it makes it easier to crush into white flour. So from the fact that you can use pas nakiya, right, clean matzahs on Pesach, it must mean that you're soaking the wheat first. Rav Papa says not necessarily. You can have pas nakiya without lesisa, because we have a Brisa that says akmachin v'aslatos, that regular flour and fine flour shall nachrim, if it belongs to non-Jews, or if you're buying it from non-Jews, shall kfarim tohorin v'shal krachin mitmein. So it depends where you're buying it from. If you're buying it from the villages, so then you can assume that they are tahor, that they are not muksher l'kabel tumah. Whereas if you purchase the flour from the cities, well then the flour will be muksher l'kabel tumah. Now, tichvar my time, how come the flour that you purchase from the villages would not be muksher l'kabel tumah? Lav mishum delo latse. Is it not because in the villages they're not as particular as in the cities, and therefore they don't soak their grains first, right? So if you buy flour from the non-Jews in the villages, you can assume that they are not muksher l'kabel tumah, since they probably did not soak them. Whereas, right, and of course we know that in order for food to be muksher l'kabel tumah, it would have to, come in contact with water. Now, therefore, okay, and in the cities we're saying that it would be muksher l'kabel tumah mistama, because they're soaking them in order to produce a finer flour. Now, vikakari leisoles, and still we're saying that, we're still referring to the flour that you're buying from the villages as well as from the cities as, right, don't purchase kemach or soles, don't purchase regular flour or fine flour. No, not don't purchase, but if you buy regular flour or fine flour, so then if you purchase it from the villages, it would be not muksher l'kabel tumah. If you purchase it from the cities, it would be muksher l'kabel tumah, but we're still referring to the flours from both the city and from the village as regular flour and fine flour. So we see that it's possible to make even fine flour without soaking. So Rava, your assertion that we must be able to soak wheat on Pesach because you're allowed to use matzah from fine flour, and therefore it must be that you could soak the wheat in order to get that fine flour. Not necessarily. You can get fine flour even without soaking. So Targuma Kimcha, So the Gemara says not necessarily. You could say that when the saying that according that in the villages, right, even though they're not soaking, or the villages where they don't soak, so for them actually the solus is irrelevant. It would really just be the regular kemach, but the fine flour would specifically be in the cities where they are soaking the wheat. Basu Amar. So then after Rava left, Rav Papa remembered a brisa, and he said, dang it, this would have been the real proof. Amar, my time lo emale meha to Amar Ibzera, Amar Yirmiyah, Amar Shmuel. How come I didn't say to Rava what Reb Zera said in the name of Reb Yirmiyah, says in the name of Shmuel, Chitin shal menachos ein lots in osam v'kakari luhu solis. That Reb Zera said in the name of Reb Yirmiyah, said in the name of Shmuel, that the wheat of the korban mincha, you don't soak them, and yet we call it solis. So there is a proof that you can have fine flour even without soaking. And therefore Rava's proof that you must be able to soak wheat on Pesach, because you can have fine flour on Pesach, you can have fine flour even without soaking. Okay. Hadar Amar Rava. Rava then said, mitzvah lelasos, not only are you allowed, not only is it mutter, not only is it permissible to soak your wheat on Pesach, it's a mitzvah to soak wheat on Pesach. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, ushmartem es hamatzis. The pasuk says that you need to guard the matzahs. Now, at what point do you need to guard the matzahs? Ilo debai lesisa shimur lemai. If not for the, it must be that you need to guard it when you're soaking the wheat, right? Meaning, you take the wheat and you soak it, and at that point you have to be very careful. Make sure it doesn't become chametz. Yishimur delisha, shima delisha, lav shimur. And if you're going to say that, no, what it means is guard the matzahs while you're preparing the dough, meaning don't worry about soaking. No, it's not what it's talking about. It's talking about when you add the water to the flour, at that point, be careful, guard it, make sure it doesn't become chametz. No, that's not what it's talking about. To Amar Rav Huna, because Rav Huna says, B'tzeikos shel nachrim, if you go to a non-Jew and you purchase dough from him, not matzahs, but dough. He makes the dough, you purchase it from him. So you're allowed to eat them on Pesach, that's fine. But just make sure that at the end, you eat a kazayis of matzah. So if it's Pesach night, and you have matzahs that you purchased the dough from a non-Jew, and then you baked it yourself, so eat as much of it as you want, that's fine. However, just make sure that at the end, you eat a kazayis of matzah that you prepared yourself, the dough. So ba'achrona in, v'rishona lo. So you yotze the chiyuv of achilas matzah with this matzah that you ate at the end, not with the matzah that you ate from the non-Jew earlier. So my timer, how come? What's the problem with the matzahs that you ate from the dough from the non-Jew? So mishum de lo avid b'ushimor. Wait, my time, mishum de lo avid b'ushimor. The reason why you can't be yotze with the matzah that you purchased the dough from the non-Jews, because there was no proper ushmartem es hamatzis. There was no proper guarding. But why not? After all you bought was dough. You made sure that, obviously, at the time that you bought the dough, it wasn't chametz, because if it was chametz, obviously you wouldn't be able to eat it. So clearly you bought dough that had not yet risen, and then you guarded it to make sure that it wouldn't rise, and you baked it. Why would that not be acceptable? You did a proper guarding, no? Elav shmamina shimur meikar ba'inon. So what do we see? So we see that it must be that we need to guard it already from earlier, from the time of soaking. So there you have it, that wheat needs to be, that we soak wheat for matzahs on Pesach, and from that point you already need to be guarding it. Umimai, who says that this is necessarily a proof that you need to soak the grain earlier and then you do shimur at that point? Dilma Shani also, maybe it's different when it comes to the dough that was purchased from non-Jews, because the be'ina denachas l'shimur, because at the point, at that initial point where it required shimur, meaning, maybe I can argue that you really only need to guard the matzahs from the time that you're kneading them, from the time that you add the water. The difference is over here, that at the time that the water was added, it was being added by a non-Jew. You weren't there. So maybe, right, at the time that guarding became relevant, lo avid lo shimur, there was no shimur because it was by the non-Jew still. But maybe I'll argue that maybe I can argue that the guarding of the matzahs really only needs to happen from the time of kneading it. And as long as there's somebody there to guard the dough from the time that the water is added, that would be considered kneading. You wouldn't, that would be considered guarding. You wouldn't have to have any kind of guarding before then. Even though we made this argument that perhaps you can argue that you really make or didn't only need to guard the dough from the time that you add the water, nonetheless, Rava still maintained his opinion that you need to guard the matzahs from even an earlier point. Because Rava said to those people who were gathering bundles of grain, that when you gather this grain already from the field, from when you're harvesting the grain already, you should do this for the intention of the mitzvah. So we see that you already need to be guarding the grain from an earlier point, from the time of harvest. And maybe this is the source for shmura mishas ktsira, right? There's different levels of shmura matzahs. So you have matzahs that are guarded from the time that they're harvested. And it sounds like this is like Rava, right? Rava is saying that even from the time that you're gathering the grain in the fields, make sure that it should be guarded. Interesting. Mar bre de Ravina minaktale ime be'arve. Aha. My bre de Ravina's mother, I don't know, maybe that's Ravina's wife, I don't know. She would guard his wheat for him in buckets from the time that it was harvested, so that they would be guarded for Pesach. Very interesting. How arva dechite, there was a certain boat laden with wheat, detava bechishta, and it sunk in the Chishta river. Shari Rava l'zabuni l'nachrim, and Rava said, all of this wheat that was on the boat that got inundated with water, you would be allowed to sell to non-Jews. And that way, you don't worry about chametz, sell to non-Jews, it's fine. Eisve Rabba bar Levi l'Rava. Rabba bar Levi asked the kasha to Rava, beged she'avad bo kilayim. If you have a garment, let's say a woolen garment, and a thread of linen gets into the woolen garment, so it's shatnez, you can't wear it. And don't even sell it to a non-Jew. Don't make it into a saddle for a donkey. But you can make it into what's the word I'm thinking of? Shrouds for a mace, for a corpse, right? Because as Rashi says, he quotes a Gemara in Masechta Shabbos and Daf Lamed, that once a person dies, he becomes free from mitzvahs, and therefore shatnez isn't relevant to a corpse, and therefore you can make shrouds from shatnez. Okay, so if you have a garment of shatnez, don't sell it to a non-Jew, don't make it into a saddle for your donkey, but you're allowed to make it into shrouds for a corpse. So, what's the problem with selling kilayim to a non-Jew? So, is it not because he might then sell it to a Jew? And this isn't just any regular kilayim, because of course we've seen that Gemara a few times where we have the person who is selling kilayim and we're saying he's allowed to wear it as long as he doesn't intend in the summer to protect himself from the sun, and in the winter to protect himself from the cold, from the rain. So that would be obvious shatnez, right? You'd be allowed to sell obvious shatnez to non-Jews, because then, if they sell it if the non-Jew sells it to a Jew, the Jew will realize that it's shatnez. But this is like a woolen garment that one thread of linen got mixed in over there. So we're concerned, don't sell it to the non-Jew, right? Because he might then end up selling it to a Jew, and the Jew won't realize, because after all, there's only one thread of linen in there. So, coming back to our case, when it comes to the boat that was filled with wheat that sunk, so how could Rava say that you could sell the wheat to a non-Jew? If he ends up selling that wheat to a Jew, he'll have chametz on Pesach. So rather, Rava retracted what he said, and he said, no, instead what you should do is you can sell one kav at a time, one small measure at a time, even to Yidden, because, as long as there's enough time to reliably get to consume all of that wheat before Pesach, so you sell them in little bits so that everybody will be able, so that we can assume that it will have already been eaten by the time Pesach arrives. One of the rabbis taught, in Molin es hakdera be-Pesach. Okay, you don't add flour to a cooked dish on Pesach. If you want to add flour to a dish on Pesach, so first put in the flour into the dish, and then you add the vinegar. That those who say first you put in the vinegar, and then afterwards you put in the flour. The assumption being that the vinegar will somehow act against the flour and prevent it from becoming chometz. Who is that opinion who says that you can even put the flour into the vinegar? Meaning, so if you have a cooked dish and it's like cooking or whatever, and you put in flour and then you pour vinegar on it, so the assumption is, right, the Tanakama says that the vinegar that you pour onto the flour will kind of like deactivate it. But if you already put in the vinegar and the vinegar has already been mixed with all the other foods in the dish, and then you put in the flour, well then the vinegar may not be strong enough to like counteract the flour. Therefore the Tanakama says that you would specifically have to put in the flour first. However, we have this other opinion who says that you can even put water, you can even add water to, no, not water, you can even add flour to a dish that already has vinegar mixed into it, and that would still be able to counteract the flour. So who is this opinion who says that you'd even be able to put the flour into this dish that already has the vinegar mixed in, and we won't be concerned about chametz? So Amar of Chizda Rabbi Yehuda. So if Chizda says it's Rabbi Yehuda, Titnan is we learn in the Mishnah Ilpis Vakadera, a pan or a pot shavirin musachin, that you took it off the fire right before Shabbos and it was really, really boiling hot. Luitin the sochan tavlin. So if it's right before Shabbos or Shabbos is starting, don't put spices in there because it's a kli rishon, right? The boiling water is going to cook the spices. But if you take some of the soup or whatever, some of the hot boiling contents, and put it into a second kli, into some kind of a bowl, well then it's a kli sheni, and then it would be fine. It wouldn't be cooking the spices. Rabbi Yehuda Amer says, Rabbi Yehuda, you could put the spices into anything, chutz midavar sheish bo chometz, but not something that has chometz, vitzir, or some kind of brine. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, even a dish that has vinegar in it, so it will cook the spices, right? Right? Rabbi Yehuda is saying you could put the spices in whatever you want as long as there isn't vinegar. But if there's vinegar, it'll cook the spices. So here also, we're going to say that the Yesh Omim is Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you can even put in the vinegar first and then put in the flour, because the vinegar is going to deactivate the flour even if the vinegar was mixed in with the rest of the food first. V'nukba Rabbi Yossi. Why don't we establish the Yesh Omim like Rabbi Yossi? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa earlier, Rabbi Yossi Omer Shorin b'chometz tzomsom. We said that if you had soaked barley in water, right? We had said earlier, don't soak barley in water. But if you did, Rabbi Yossi says just throw the barley into vinegar and the vinegar will deactivate it. So we see that Rabbi Yossi also says that vinegar will deactivate the fermentation. So Kashmeina le Rabbi Yossi hanimile deise be'ene. You can argue that when Rabbi Yossi says put the barley in the vinegar and the vinegar will deactivate the fermentation, that is only when the vinegar, it's like only vinegar there. But here we're talking about cooking, and vinegar is just one ingredient. So maybe in that case, Rabbi Yossi would say that the vinegar mixed together with everything else would be unable to prevent the fermentation. Okay. Ula Amar says Ula, aser. Whether you put in the vinegar first, whether you put in the flour first, it makes no difference. Stay away from it. Mishum, because of lech amina nazira, schor l'chaim lo sikra. We say to a nazir, hey, go away, go around, do not go into the vineyard, right? A nazir, of course, is not allowed to eat grapes. So we suggest that, hey, don't even go near the vineyard, just stay away. Here also, when it comes to chametz on Pesach, just stay away. Don't play with fire. Don't put flour into dishes and vinegar afterwards to deactivate the flour. Just stay away. Don't get close to making chametz. Rav Papi Sharile Livordike de Verish Gelusa the Mamacha Kedera Bachasise. Rav Papi permitted the people who worked in the house of the Reish Gelusa to thicken up dishes with cooked, with like baked, like wheat flour. Says Rava, hey, is there really anybody who would say that this would be permitted in a place where there's so many people working? Those who say that Rava actually said the opposite, not just like who would say that this is permitted, but he actually himself would thicken up dishes with this like baked flour. Alright, so I guess then that would mean it was okay. Okay, well, that was Daf Mem of Masechta Pesachim. We basically talked about like wheat becoming flour, becoming chametz and barley. And there was that interesting thing that came up though, towards the bottom of Amud Aleph about Rava saying that you already have to guard the wheat from the time that it's harvested, essentially, which is super interesting. I suspect that might be the source for matzah shmura from the time of harvest, which is very interesting. All right, peace.